This question, we've had several along these lines, so I'll just read one, and if yours is similar, this is going to take care of that. It says, with a child in kindergarten at Canton and one entering pre-K, hopefully if funding exists, what is the plan for our district if we are going to be fiscally insolvent in the next year? Does the state have a contingency plan to provide for our children's education? This has been a question we've had trouble getting an answer to, so.
Want me to start? First of all, that's a great question. Once again, I met last year with the Division of Budget and SED, and I actually asked that question because I had heard from some of my superintendents that it's a distinct possibility, and their answer was, we don't know what's going to happen. I know that sounds terrible coming from the state agency that controls it, but that was the response that I got. Next Wednesday, I'm actually meeting with Regent Dawson, and I have a request in for SED to talk about a number of these issues. But one of them, since most of the people here I think are from Canton, has to do with the issue that Superintendent Gregory brought up, that they're using old data, and if new data was used, it would be helpful to Canton because they wouldn't be classified as an average needs school anymore. And so the research we've done at this point says that statutorily the feds have until September of 2013 to certify the census data so that information can be used. At the same time, I'm meeting with the regent to see if there's a way around that specifically for Canton, whether it requires special legislation for Canton only, that we find a way to force the issue so that Canton's numbers can be looked at so that they can be reclassified not as a average well school, but as a low well school. So that's where we're at now. Last year when the governor's budget came out, it was pretty scary numbers. Our conference was able in the Senate budget to restore, quite a bit of money there. And so for me, this is kind of like a waiting game, my third year, to wait and see what the governor puts out. I know we're all concerned about what the hurricane is going to do to the revenue and the expenses in Albany. And so the first hurdle is to look and see what's in the governor's budget for school aid and then build, from that. So, it's our hope. I know that all of us, it's really important that we do what we can to restore any money to the North Country schools. So I guess for me, the first step would be to meet with the regent, see if we can help Canton in particular have the current data be used, and then wait for the governor's budget and try to restore in the Senate budget some of that school funding if there's a problem there.
There is a train of thought, and I don't necessarily personally subscribe to it, that this is really an covert effort to essentially starve the beast, to compel school districts, force school districts to look at consolidation, shared services, all of those things that were contained in that report yesterday without actually mandating it. As you know, mandate is a dirty word in Albany right now, but this is a way by allowing these financial pressures to build to a point that for some school districts, it may be the only available option. I know up and down through my district, a number of schools are looking at consolidations and mergers. A majority of them have rejected those. But again, I think if these fiscal pressures that we all know we're facing this year, and certainly if not this year, by the next year, are just going to force some hard decisions to be made. And there are some that believe that's the process that's now going on. You can take that for what it's worth.
Although what's missing in what I'm talking about in Albany is we're not talking about chronically underperforming schools. We are talking about schools with very stellar track records, schools that have high achievement, have never had fiscal problems. The only thing that has changed for schools like Canton is the cuts, is the gap elimination adjustment. So the fact that the state does not have a plan in place does provide us the opportunity to really emphasize that point. Yeah, you shouldn't have to create a process to deal with schools going insolvent, but for the manner in which you have made cuts to state aid, these schools would be fine. It's not like there's some other compelling reason for the state to have to step in because it's a school in need of improvement or its students are failing. And I think that it's much easier for them to try to redistribute money from wealthy suburban districts downstate than to create a whole nother monster that they will have to staff up to come in and micromanage every school district. I don't believe SED wants to do it. I believe they are counting on the governor and the legislature to fix the formula that we all know is really the civil rights issue of our day. My philosophy is that if there's a large group of people that are also being disadvantaged by the historical flaws in the school aid formula, that it's better to include them in our reform efforts because that will be more voices. My piece of legislation includes the big 5 school districts, which are the population base of this upstate. Without them being part of this effort, it's one thing to get a bill passed out of a committee by, people in the same party. It's a whole nother story to get a bill passed in both houses. I think because of the coalition government in the Senate this year, that we really do have an opportunity to partner with some of the upstate senators, such as David Valesky, who represents one of these big 5 school districts, to make the meaningful change, to take advantage of the numbers that really support making this real reform. I think we have the opportunity now and the political cover to make this happen. And so we have to make the argument that, as much as people like to say this isn't a money issue, I think it's very obvious that when previously high-performing, financially stable school districts find themselves in situations like this, it's not because of a failure of the administration of those schools or the community. It's because something major has happened in their funding stream that they did not have control over. I think those are the points we make. That these are not low-performing school districts and people that are abusing the money that they have. This is the fact that we are not providing the basic level of financial support to provide a sound basic education to our students. The state has been essentially found to not be complying with the Constitution. We put a plan in place, well, before I was there, to fix it. The recession put those plans on hold. We all know it has to happen. And because the economy has not rebounded as we would all have liked it, some other people in this state are going to have to feel a little bit of the pain that we're feeling here in the North Country. There are schools that have not had to make any cuts programmatically. They should at least have to tighten their belts a little bit, and they should not feel that they are entitled to the same amount of funding they have received year after year. We have to put in a system that recaptures money that they have gotten for political purposes, not based on any sort of need, and that needs to go to the schools that have the need. And my bill does just that. It does it very aggressively. Whether or not that bill will ultimately make it through as what the reform is, I'm certainly not going to start off negotiations already ceding half the battlefield.
If I could want to follow up a little bit on Addie's points, and she did make a good point that there is a practical political aspect to this whole discussion, and she's absolutely right. It's painfully obvious that if we're getting shortchanged, somebody else is getting more than they deserve. How, in a political environment in Albany, do we go to those folks, those legislators, and tell them, you go back and tell your school districts you're getting too much money, we need to put it somewhere else. They're going to resist that. That's a practical consideration that we've fought for years. Frankly, the only way, going back through the Pataki years, and there were some years when the legislature and the governor were very forthcoming to our school districts. The reason that is to drive a very low percentage of aid to the upstate schools. They had to drive a tremendous amount to the suburban school districts. We used to get the aid runs, and I would sit there and you know, you'd get what your school districts would be getting, and I'd see my school districts getting 2, 3, 4% aid increases. You'd peek over at the guy next to you from down the line, down in the Hudson Valley, or down in the suburban areas, and they're getting 8, 10, 12%. That's the only way we could drive the money upstate. It's been a long-standing flaw with the formula, and it's time to change it, as Addie says.